To give a bit of background to this topic that we've chosen, I'm just going to explain a bit about personal branding and what it means. So personal branding is an intentional strategic practice in which you define and express your own value proposition. Though people have always carefully cultivated their public personas and reputations online, your brand extends far beyond this into the perception people have of you in the workplace and day-to-day life. It is the values, behaviours, attitudes, and expectations people have of you and the narrative that surrounds you. As Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, is quoted as saying, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. Professional and personal success depends on persuading others to recognise your value. So for better or worse, in today's world, everyone is a brand. And you need to develop yours and get comfortable marketing it. And we're here from BNY Mellon to help give you a kickstart in strengthening your personal brand. And I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves and, as a bit of background, also explain to you what they think their personal brand is. So I'll start with you, Jide.
Me first.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Babajide Benedict Casimir Ogulano-Neal, for short, Jide. Thanks, Mom. I work in our asset servicing business. Specifically, I'm the director for private markets within product. Ergo, I pretty much tell people what to do from a fund accounting perspective, or say for a fund accounting, investor services, performance, and so on and so forth. But mainly focus on setting the scene in terms of our target operating model. Cool.
Hello everyone, my name is Paula Mafdon. I work as a lead analyst within our data and platform solutions team. So we help our EMEA asset servicing clients, whether that be pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies, with all things data, performance and accounting. And I've been doing that for almost 2 years.
Joseph?
Hi everyone, I'm Joseph Boateng, and I joined BNY Mellon almost a year ago as an experienced hire. Prior to that, I was on a 2-year graduate rotation program at RBC, and in terms of my role, I'm a senior analyst within the FX platform sales team. So we're responsible for the sale of a suite of FX solutions, including our automated spot FX and our passive currency hedging solutions.
And I think it's over to me. Hi all, my name is Emma Ashby. I am the Director of Recruitment for the EMEA region. So I manage a wonderful team based out of numerous countries across the region, and we manage recruitment and obviously support the business for about 18 different countries currently. So I've been in recruitment myself for 24 years, a little bit scary to say that now. Obviously started when I was 5, having worked now in about 6 or 7 different countries, which has been an incredible experience from both a recruitment and a financial services perspective. I've been heading up the EMEA team now for 3.5 years and counting.
I'll just leave it. Thanks, Emma. And how would you describe your personal brand, would you say?
My personal brand, now I would say that people would tell you, and I would like to think certainly, that I'm very passionate about what I do. Again, 24 years in the industry, you need to be passionate about recruitment, about talent acquisition. I think I'm a person anyway who wants to leave things better than I found them. I think whether that's a problem to solve, a recruitment process that isn't working, a more junior recruiter that comes in terms of being able to make sure that they're developing in the right way, they can see a great career path, creating succession planning for the team. I am kind of very much about making sure that everybody's coming on that journey with me. And I think you'll probably guess it already from this call, I try to do it all with a smile on my face. So it's all about the positivity.
Cool, thank you. And yeah, I think supporting young talent is something that today you're also really interested in, hence being here today to support us. And so what about you? Would you say that kind of builds part of your brand?
Very much so. I mean, mine is very much focused on, say, knowledge and innovation. And when I say knowledge and innovation, it's more because like, I've kind of like, skewed more towards strategy. And for me, strategy is always basically saying, okay, hey, how can we do things better? How can we add value for our clients? How can we also sort of say like, lay out a path for, graduates, and not just graduates, but say like, more junior hires, and say like, folks that are in the early part of their career, how can we basically elevate them, and how can we build them to basically be our level? That should essentially say like, be your job if you're a manager, say if you're ever a senior resource. So yes, that's certainly sort of say like, part of my MO, and sort of say like, part of my personal brand. And I would also add to that, but like, another thing is also focusing on surrounding yourself with knowledge. So what I mean by that is not necessarily say like, being the smartest person in the room. I always make sure that like, whenever I'm working with folks that are more junior than myself, they are absolutely much smarter than myself. And I'm assuming that these two are, so yeah.
Thank you both. So yeah, Jide and Emma, I think you're obviously more established, more historic brands, but over to Joseph, how have you been kind of fostering your brand as you're relatively early on in your career, and what kind of things are you focusing on and establishing for yourself?
Yeah, I'll say for me, and great responses from both Jide and Emma. I'll say on my end, being relatively junior in my career, I would categorize my brand into two areas. So let me give a breakdown. So the first area is my day-to-day. So how do I want to be seen as during my day-to-day within the organization? And first of all, that's ultimately to be reliable, organized, and proactive, like being seen as someone that's like ultimately trustworthy to get the job done. Because yeah, part of my role is sort of supporting the wider team sales effort. So yeah, all of those values that I've spoken about are all inherent within the role. And I'll say the second area is, okay, so what are the wider underlying values? And for me, that's ultimately champion D&I initiatives and helping to foster the development of those that are also in the formative stages of their career. So grads and interns, and also investing in their career development. So I'll say yeah, that's what drives me.
Great, thanks, Joseph. And finally, Paula.
Yes, no pressure. I would say good things have been said, but yes, I would say my brand, again, quite similar. I like to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's something that can help us not only in our day-to-day business, but also empowering the next generation of people, as you said, who are coming, whether it be from schools to university students, to interns and grads, as both Joseph and Jide have mentioned. For me personally, I call it developing relationships. Some people call it networking. I feel like it's really useful to get to know your surrounding, know the culture, know the people that kind of make up the firm that you're part of. So that's another thing that's quite big in my personal brand. And then lastly is learning. I love to learn and put myself out there, and you'll hear maybe later on sometimes where that's put me in a bit of trouble, possibly. But raising my hand and volunteering is another thing that I try and encompass in my personal brand.
Thank you very much. And yeah, something you touched on slightly earlier, Emma, but what do you consider to be a good brand to have as a manager? And do you have any top tips for managing other people and making sure that that supports your brand?
Yeah, thank you. And I think this doesn't just go for being a manager. I think this goes for anybody in any stage of their career, and it's a courage to lead. I think you can lead no matter what stage you are in your career. Now, it's about being resilient in your approach. How do you approach these things? How do you get to the result that you need? Listening to your team to support their development needs. Not everybody's single development is going to be the same. If I look at over my career, I have people who, came in from the beginning saying, I want your job. I want to, make director by a particular age, et cetera, because they're passionate about people. They want to manage people. And I have others who have no interest in managing other people whatsoever. They're happy to do their day-to-day job, do their delivery. But again, it's about listening to what they want rather than fitting, into a particular box that you think for them. I think be solutions focused. And for me, very much about leading with empathy. I think empathy should be used in any relationship, business or otherwise. I often say to my team, especially when people are frustrated or stressed out or whatever, always put yourself in someone else's shoes. So, when you're responding to an email or you're having a conversation, How would you feel if you were at the other side of things? You know, whether you manage somebody directly or not, you know, people are going to take that feedback on board, that influence in terms of what you're feeding back. So do put yourself in their shoes. I think in terms of, gosh, top tips, looking at a good brand for yourself, think about managers that you've had or maybe you currently have. Again, something I always say to my team when they're sort of looking to take the next step is, and something I've certainly done throughout my career is, I wouldn't say there's only ever been one really good manager that I've had. I think it's been more of a case of almost emulating little bits and pieces from different people to bring in my own management style, you know, to work out who's the type of manager I want to be. And, you know, the flip side of that, what kind of manager do I not want to be? You know, what are some of those attributes, those behaviors that, you know, I don't want people to look at me and think that I'm like that. You know, I think it's also making sure that you know yourself better than anybody. So work out what style works for you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess kind of another take on that, the empathy and managing people is coaching. So the informal kind of management. And Jide, I know that's something that you're quite big on. So would you mind kind of answering, you know, what do you think makes a good coach as a brand?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also before I say, like, you know, before I jump into coaching, so again, going back to one of the things that I mentioned, in terms of, like, you know, what I like to think of as part of my personal brand is innovation. You know, innovation really needs, pretty much leads to progress. Now, what's the best way for you to say, like, you know, for you to have progress? That's the very much to make sure that you're arming the next generation to basically, like, you know, do things better and to understand things better. It's always basically like, you know, ask why. Okay, hey, why are we doing something this way? Why can't we do it in a different way? Like, you know, which you might have not have thought of. So say, like, you know, that's one of the other interesting things about, say, like, you know, if you're a coach, or say if you're more focused on coaching, and that, like, you know, as I mentioned earlier, you have to be ready to surround yourself with knowledge and with people that are smarter than you, so that you can essentially say, like, you know, facilitate making better decisions. It's not about you being the hippo executive in the room and you basically making all of the decisions yourself. So to go back to the question, as to say, like, you know, I mean, what makes a great coach, or say, like, you know, why you should focus on that. You need to realize at the moment that you're very much a coach, or a player coach, as a manager, your main job, as I mentioned, is to elevate people to your level. Your main job is to basically shape them from a skill set perspective, from a knowledge perspective within the industry, from also building their networks within your organization. Ergo, basically being happy to put them in front of EC members and senior members when they're doing things right, and also take them out of the firing line when they do things wrong. Ergo, it's my responsibility if they do something wrong. If they do something fantastic, it is absolutely all of them. I did absolutely nothing but just sit back and watch them flourish. You should also make sure that, like, you know, that is part of your ethos area. You're not taking away credit for the work that they've done. And finally, you should also basically, like, you know, be happy to go against the grain. And by going against the grain, a good way to visualize it is something that Emma mentioned, in the sense that, like, all right, fine, you might want to progress through, you know, an industry, or say through an organization, but you might not necessarily say, like, you know, want to manage people. That requires a different skill set and a different way to basically manage that person, because they might not necessarily say, like, you know, speaking in public, or they might not necessarily say, like, you know, feel like they have the time of day to actually sit down with somebody and to coach them, because the moment you're a coach, that is your most important job as a manager. The most important thing is not you basically meeting your deliverables. It's basically making sure that you're elevating those directs that are under you to basically, like, you know, get to your level. So as I mentioned, having the visibility and the ability to sort of say, like, you know, go against the grain, and also realize that, okay, hey, look, I need to take a different approach with somebody else's, is also something that has to be ingrained in you.
Perfect, thank you. So I know a lot about branding as, you know, consistently working on it, and people say it's the things you do when no one's looking. But I know that sometimes there can be moments that really are pivotal to your personal brand. Paula, would you like to touch on one of those?
Yes, I'll be happy to. I think for me, the first thing that was quite pivotal, especially early on in my career, was really just raising my hand. So I think the perfect example was when I accidentally volunteered to present on a town hall for my entire line of business, because I just decided to raise my hand. So I think, although it was quite nerve-wracking when I found out that there was more than, I don't know, 20 people that I thought was going to be on the call, for me it led on to more opportunities. It meant that for my entire division, they could see that I was somebody who was confident or willing to present or willing to put themselves out there. And it meant the following week when we had a Christmas social, people were like, oh, I have a new client. Would you like to come and present to the client? And so for me, it gave like tangible career progression opportunities, because people then saw you as somebody who was willing or somebody who could either learn or put themselves out there. So I think that was definitely a pivotal moment in my career.
Okay, and Jide, I heard you laugh. I had a question. Same for you.
Sorry, the reason I'm saying is that my answer is very much correlated to having women in the room. I mean, for me, sorry to say, like, you know, my pivotal moment, I'm not going to name the bank that I was at the time, but it was when I was a VP, and I very much had I pretty much had a screaming contest with a very senior MD, and I cannot emphasize this point enough. His words, not mine. His words, not mine. His words, not mine. I basically said to him that, hey, look, you know, I need to promote resource A because she has been stellar for 2 years. She's absolutely, like, you know, operating at a level that, like, you know, is far above what she's being paid at, and sort of say, like, you know, what's part of her remit. And word for word, he basically said to me, you know, look, she's only just gotten married. She's going to start pumping out kids soon. So no. And that pretty much kind of, like, you know, led to me basically having a screaming contest with him, because I immediately saw red. As I'm sure most of us that are on this call that come from either, say, an ethnic background, or say, you know, we're of a different gender than, say, like, you know, the traditional patriarchal gender, we can very much, you know, recognize that, like, you know, it's always left up to the victim to say, like, you know, manage your emotions and say, like, you know, stay in check and manage whenever anything goes wrong. And at this point, because I was absolutely just caught off guard by somebody at his level basically still thinking like that, as I mentioned, I just basically saw red. So that kind of, like, you know, led to loads of things that was a detriment to me, which, to be honest, I wouldn't change. So things like that MD basically escalating my work on a weekly basis, that MD always basically challenging me whenever we were on client calls together, would always basically go against me. And then, as I found out, because I had a very good network with some senior folks, would always basically, like, you know, speak against myself whenever we got to the MD promotion cycles. So ultimately it cost me an MD promotion, and I pretty much left the organization because I kind of, like, you know, put up with that for 2 years. I mean, I obviously made sure that, like, whenever I interacted with him, everything was written down. I made sure that I kept my emotions in check, and so on and so forth. But it was pivotal for me because I then basically got known for basically being a very, very fiery character and being very, very emotional, which is a shame because, I mean, as I mentioned before, if you're the victim of something, it's left up to you to basically, like, you know, manage your emotions. So I've since learned from that, that although that is sort of still, like, you know, I mean, a very painful thing to take on, you very much kind of, like, you know, also have to, even though you're doing the right thing, you still have to make sure that you're taking the emotions out of it. And apart from, say, like, you know, taking the emotions out of it, you're very, very logical in your communication to senior management and to human capital as to what the problem is, what the proposed solutions are, and the ability to say, like, you know, have difficult conversations. So something that I suppose I've learned after having, in my opinion, a negative twist, or say, like, you know, a roadblock at one point in my career. But again, I'll emphasize the point, I wouldn't take anything back off the back of what I did. So yeah.
Wow, that's a shocking story, but thank you for sharing it. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily advise using feedback with that particular person. You probably wouldn't want to take on their points of view, but I know that feedback can be a really important way to kind of bounce back from situations that are detrimental to your brand, and you can work on building them. So Emma, would you mind sharing any words of wisdom on how you'd advise dealing with that sort of thing, or someone more reasonable who might
Yeah, I will say, I won't say I've had a lot of screaming matches in my career, but I've certainly dealt with some very emotional people along the way. And look, and I think, you know, touching on feedback is absolutely key to building your brand, and I cannot stress that enough. But I will say you shouldn't be waiting feedback to come to you. Always reach out for feedback. I'll give you a perfect example. One of my team was actually on the invite for this, and Katie's been with us for about 8 months. She's right at the beginning of her recruitment career, but I said to her, are you going to join the call today? Because I'd really like to get some feedback from you as somebody who was at the beginning of your career, how we talk about brand. Now, that's something that we should be doing at every single level, because everybody has a different perspective. Everybody has a different way of approaching situations. Everybody has a different way of thinking. You know, if we look at, you know, such a wide range of things that fall under the diversity bracket, you know, neurodiversity is a thing, the way someone approaches a situation. So it is always good to get someone else's perspective and perception. And I think, what do others see in you? Because you won't necessarily see it. You know, what is the feedback of you? What is their perception of what you're delivering or not delivering? You know, what can you change? And again, I was thinking earlier before we jumped on the call in terms of how I worked out things with my team when it comes to feedback. And we tend to do this thing on a twice a year. So after the first half of the year and the second half of the year, so our mid-years and our end of years. And it's a start, stop, continue. What should I start doing based on the feedback I've been given? What should I stop doing because it's not making me reach my goals? It's not helping me develop. Am I getting any return investment on my time and my efforts? And what should I continue doing that I'm getting the feedback on that's going really well? Because ultimately, you know, how one person sees what you're delivering can be very, very different on exactly the same project than somebody else in that project sees. So it is really important to get that kind of feedback. And I think it's a good way to reset yourself as well. Because, you know, again, an example, we've got our mid-year reviews coming up across the business. Remember that, people on the call, mid-year reviews in about 2 to 3 weeks. And, you know, we are going to be talking about where people are at with their goals. And it's really important that if you're somebody who is reaching out for constant feedback, then what you can do is you can be resetting yourself for every time. You can know before you get to these reviews that actually I am on the right track, or I might need to adjust that slightly because it's not getting me the result that I want. So feedback is absolutely key, even when it's not something that you necessarily want to hear. It's helping you develop.
Perfect. Yeah, I totally agree. I think really important early out on your career as well to kind of work out how people perceive you, because you might not necessarily be that self-aware. So Joseph, would you mind also kind of commenting on how you use feedback or how you ask for it? I know it's not always easy.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, I'd just like to say, Emma, you had like a great response. Like literally took the words out of my mouth, to be honest. But yeah, in terms of how I view feedback, like ultimately, yeah, echoing Emma's words as well. Like feedback is important for the development of your brand, and yeah, it's also important to be proactive about seeking feedback. So for me, one form of feedback that I seek is through like verbal meetings. So be it catch-ups with my one-to-ones with my manager, or my line manager, seeking feedback on the day-to-day, because that's ultimately who I report into. But not only my manager, different people at different stages of their career. So whether that's further up the career ladder or at a similar stage in their career to me, like it's important to see things from their perspective. Because like Emma was saying, people perceive you differently. So yeah, it's important to reach out to and cast a net as wide as possible in order to challenge yourself to develop further. So yeah, those are definitely sort of the methods that I use to sort of implement to develop.
And so Emma, what kind of things do you brief recruiters for when hiring for the BNY Mellon brand?
Sure. And I think this goes for several other brands. So I've worked for numerous financial services organizations, pretty much globally, actually. And what I will always say is it will always come down to values and behaviors. So obviously people are going to look at what your skills are, what your experience is, but ultimately those values and those behaviors, those mission statements that a company has, they're the things you're also going to be interviewed on. So, you know, whether you call it a behavioral interview, a competency-based, you know, questioned interview, it's going to come down to the values. So, for example, ours at BNY Mellon this is going to test me, passion for excellence, integrity, courage to lead and strengthen diversity. So all of our questions, our behavioural questions that we have in any interview, regardless of the grade, are around, can you give an example of where you've shown a passion for excellence, or where you could have shown a passion for excellence, and how did you turn around to get a positive result? So whilst I think regardless of when you apply for a role, you should always be looking up the website, getting more information on the company anyway, a lot of people overlook things like the values, and actually it has a lot more of a core base in terms of how your interview process or your recruitment process is going to go. So definitely from that. I've noted something here as well that I wanted to make sure I was sharing with everybody, because it's certainly very big in the financial services industry, in that a lot of companies now are investing in AI. So ourselves, BNY Mellon, we've invested in a tool called Eightfold AI. So essentially what it does is it looks at everybody's CV as it comes through. It automatically goes through LinkedIn for us as well in terms of who's open for work, and it matches those keywords. Now, you all might just have one CV that you tend to use, but I promise you now, ourselves, majority of our competitors right now have installed this AI, and what it will do is before you even get to a manual view in front of a recruiter, it will be pulling together all of the keywords from what's in the job description to what's in your CV. So what I would suggest is if you get to a point where you don't feel that you have enough in terms of your skills and experience aligned with that, make sure you're mentioning some of those keywords in a personal statement, normally 3 to 5 lines long, just so already you're giving yourself a fighting chance when you're applying for a role, because the artificial intelligence is already matching you to the position. And trust me when I say all of our competitors are using it as well. So if I can give you any top tip about that today in terms of recruiters looking at your CV, please look at the advert, please look at your CV and try and use as many of those keywords as possible.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, I completely agree. I think as someone who's just recently joined here, I feel like I've landed somewhere by accident that really matches my own values. But it's an interesting thing to think about when you're looking for jobs, that you do actually align to the culture of the place too. So yeah, aligning your brand. And moving on finally to career development, so we have time for some questions at the end. I thought I'd just do another kind of roundup of what are your top tips for building a brand. So Ginny.
Top tips for building a brand. I'll jump on something that was mentioned before. Definitely basically being open to feedback. You should always be open to all kinds of feedback, constructive and non-constructive, because I mean, obviously from the non-constructive feedback, you can kind of still extract some useful pieces of information. So I very much say that being open to feedback is definitely one of the things that you should be open to. Also making sure that you're gearing yourself to essentially say network at a senior level. So not just networking within your peers, but networking at a very, very senior level, or just volunteering for things can also help from a network perspective. I believe you gave a very, very great example of that. And then finally, I mean, as I mentioned, even though I really won't take anything that I did back, because I felt that it was very vital from an integrity perspective. But one thing that I've certainly learned from that experience that I explained earlier with the MD was the ability to manage my emotions and do the right thing. So you're still doing the right thing, but you still have to manage your emotions, as I mentioned. Come to the table with the problem statement and then also the solution, not just basically your problem and then leaving it to the universe to essentially solve. So those are the elements that I would manage. That I would focus on for building a brand.
Thank you very much, Paula.
My top tips would be leverage what you enjoy already. What do you do for fun? What are you passionate about? So whether it be in your spare time, you already like to volunteer in your local community, or whether you like to share advice about how you got your grad role or how you entered into the industry, I think try and leverage what you actually enjoy. And a quick example, there's someone in my team who loves to travel in his spare time. He's already been to Asia and Taiwan and Korea. Yeah, and it's only May. So for him, his brand is built around traveling. So it means whenever there's an opportunity within the team, we're an EMEA team, if there's a client in the Middle East that we're prospecting, they quite often tap on his shoulder because they know he's really willing to travel. So I feel like even if it's something as simple as that, make sure you leverage what you actually enjoy. And then another point would be to be willing to do stuff even when people are not watching, when you don't think you'll be compensated. number one, it's great practice, and number two, it's a good opportunity for you to get feedback about how you're presenting yourself. So not only when there's money or when there's a potential gain for yourself, should you be trying to do stuff, but when you think it could develop you personally. So yeah, those are my top tips.
Thank you very much. Joseph?
Yeah, thank you. Great responses so far, like I said. On my end, my key top tip is ultimately doing the absolute best every time with what you currently have, so your current responsibilities. And why do I say that? So put it this way, you want to move up the career ladder, and ultimately you want to show that you're more than capable and you're going above and beyond with your current responsibilities in order to receive additional responsibilities and move up the career ladder. And ultimately, to echo everybody else, that comes from building your network, getting things done and getting your hands dirty, doing, like I said, going above and beyond your current role. And to complement that, I'll say another tip in order to become more effective is being vocal. So make sure that you're always vocal. So ultimately seeking feedback on how you can develop and become more effective with your current responsibilities. So yeah.
Good one. Thanks, Joseph. And Emma?
And thank you guys, because that all three of them lead me really nicely into my finishing point. And that is, think about what you want to be known for, because it's not just about, you know, this is my brand, this is the feedback I've had, but what do you actually want to be known for? And I think that's really important to go away and have a think about that. So do you want to be known as a problem solver? Do you want to be known as someone who gets things done? Do you want to know somebody who has commercial acumen or goes above and beyond, or is resilient, or is empathetic, you know, as a leader? And I think, to a point I think it was G-Day made earlier, in find that sponsor in the business for you. Having senior people back you in the business is one of the easiest ways to get your brand out there. You know, and a lot of my team get a little bit shy about telling me about their successes, but they don't need to be their own cheerleader. As a manager wanting to be a good leader, you know, I should be their cheerleader. So rather than have to, you know, email, you know, 5 different managers saying, look at me, aren't I wonderful, look what I've done, let your manager do that for you. Let someone more senior than them do that for you, whether that's through a mentorship, a coach, or your direct manager. I think, you know, you want to make sure that you're getting, I guess, the right acknowledgement for your work. And obviously, if people are talking about what you're doing, then it is for the right reasons in that respect. So work out what you want to be known for and align yourself to someone more senior in the business.
Very much. I think we're ready to take some questions from the floor. If anyone's got one? Yeah, go for it.
How can you use your personal brand to change the Black narrative in the corporate environment?
Yeah, that's one hell of a home singer of a question. Yeah, no, I can take that one. No, very, very good question. It's let me start from the top. It's basically like, you know, taking a look at yourself, and as Emma said, what do you basically, like, you know, want to be known for? How do you come across, and how do you sort of say, like, you know, break the mold in terms of how do you break the mold in terms of, say, like, you know, some of the negative connotations that are tied to, say, like, you know, being Black. So, like, I mean, a perfect example or something that can help you visualize it is that when I first started in 2007, I had one of the biggest afros on the face of the earth, like, you know, a rough afro. And I just basically remember every time I basically went to a client, I'll ignore the part about people touching my hair, separate conversation. But just the fact that, like, you know, once I started talking and once I got into the swing of things, people will essentially basically go, oh, you're actually smart. I've basically had that said to me for years and years and years, until I basically got to a point where I was frustrated and I decided, you know what, I'm just going to start cutting my hair, because that way no one basically gets to a meeting and they see my hair and they're immediately like, oh, well, here we go. Here's another potential rapper, and so on and so forth. but it came up until, say, lockdown in 2020 for me to sort of, like, get comfortable with my hair again, in the sense that I was like, you know what, hang on a second. I'm very much known for being an innovator. I'm very much known for being a strategist. I'm very much known for having all of this knowledge, and not just myself, but my team, and surrounding myself with that knowledge. Why does it matter what I look like? It shouldn't matter what I look like. It should be based on, the narrative for me should essentially be based on my skill set. So I would very much say that, like, it's all about you getting comfortable with who you are. I would argue that it took me far too long to get comfortable with who I was. I really should have done it a lot earlier, but it's fine. Everyone has different timelines. But with that, I felt like I started breaking down a lot of barriers, because I don't go into any meeting with anyone basically like, saying that, or anyone having that thought process. It's very much, okay, hey, what's in here and what's coming out of your mouth, and how are you interacting with people? I mean, to the point that now I've decided, you know what, dreadlocks it is. So I've now got dreadlocks, and I mean, if I think about it, working in a bank with dreadlocks many years ago would have been an absolute no-no. So in my opinion, it would very much say be getting very comfortable with yourself, making it known what you want to be remembered for, as Emma mentioned, and then that's how you can start basically changing the narrative, because people then start thinking, okay, hey, maybe I do have a bigoted view, by just basically looking at the negative stereotype associated with you, and just basically, like, running with that.
And I think while we look for the next question to add to that, I think you also can find allies or advocates internally. I think we're quite an inclusive bank, I would like to think that. But quite often you'll see that we have a multicultural group that's kind of hosting this impact as well. So I feel like you will definitely have allies, and you can find, I think Emma and both Jide mentioned, finding sponsors, finding mentors. I think there are many opportunities for you to kind of change that narrative that you think may be negative. But definitely don't be afraid. I feel like it is quite an open culture. So if you see something that you would like to change, reach out, be proactive, as people have said, and you'll be surprised at how receptive people are. Yeah.
And sorry, one other thing I just want to add to what you just mentioned. One thing that I really should have mentioned at the start of this call, and Joe kind of touched on it, is like, mentorship. Like, don't just focus on, okay, hey, because I'm Black, or okay, hey, because I'm from Nigeria, okay, hey, because I'm from Ghana, and so on and so forth. My mentor has to basically be from this place. You should very much be open to say, like, the inclusive nature of the mentorship, because what that also helps with is it helps a reverse education. The person that's mentoring you can clearly see some of the challenges that you're going through and they haven't gone through. So it helps them recognize the entitled position that they're in. It also helps you basically get another ally. So I would also say, very much focus on the inclusive nature of networking as well.
Here's a good one. What's the best way to convey feedback to an employee that is struggling to reach their goals or to fully integrate into the brand? Any takers for that one?
I feel this has Emma written on me.
Yeah, probably.
It's like, if nobody wants to answer anything, send them to HR. HR can deal with it. I think that's a really interesting question, in that I would say it actually really does depend on the individual. And, if I kind of, I guess, look at teams that I've managed in the last, handful of years, I think some people take feedback better than others. And I think, again, talking about management style and all the rest of it, you do have to adapt that style depending on the individual. So, it's the same as, I'd have someone in my team that I would need to micromanage and give them constant feedback and what they're doing well and what they need to improve on. But on the other side of things, I've got other people that I don't have to do that anywhere near as often. I think if you're talking about goals and things like that, I think it's about making sure the one thing you can do is set a structure. So, for example, in those regular one-to-one meetings, talk about how they think they're doing, how to give examples that automatically pinpoint back to the goals that you have set for them, what's working, what's not, and what do they think they can do? Because I think one thing that managers can make a really big mistake of doing is just telling people what they should be doing rather than asking them. So, you need to encourage people to think for themselves. And whilst you're giving feedback, and let's be honest, most of the time, 9 times out of 10, this is from a negative perspective, you want to kind of put it back onto somebody else to take accountability, to take ownership for what they're not doing, and saying, okay, well, if it's not working, what do you think you could be doing, as opposed to telling them what they should be doing? But hopefully that
Perfect. Thank you
helps.
very much. That's really helpful. Joseph, maybe one for you. Do you have any advice on finding mentors or sponsors?
I think on my end is about being proactive. So ultimately that comes through networking. So like I said, seeking out people that are further up the career ladder. And ultimately it doesn't just stop with one person, like to echo what Jide was saying as well. So for me personally, like I have multiple mentors or multiple sponsors like within the team and like within the wider organization. It's all about sort of picking their brains and learning and iterating upon those that have come before you as well. So that's how I go about it. So ultimately, it's first establishing those relationships and networking with those people, and then building a connection, and going from there.
We're coming up on time, do you think?
Yes. We have time for
One more? Go on,
Yeah,
is that
one more.
choose
Let's see.
one?
Do we have one?
There's people asking about developing their communication skills. How do you manage high pressure situations?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. We could probably take both of those questions. So I think that there was one that basically said, how do you improve your communication skills? Believe it or not, I actually don't like talking to people, and I actually don't like people. I like being alone in my room, just watching anime or reading manga. But one thing that I invested in heavily was basically like, taking communication skills classes. There could be loads of courses available to you in terms of, say, like, some of the learning tools within your organization. Take advantage of that. YouTube is also a fantastic place for, say, like, communication skills videos and learning courses as well. Just if it's kind of like, mentioned also, say, like, reaching out to, say, like, multiple mentors. So say, like, if you're in maybe, say, like a pre-sales capacity, having those people listen to your demos, as you mentioned when you took the town hall, also say, like, putting yourself in high pressure or, say, like, uncomfortable situations, like, be very much ready to sort of, say, like, be very much ready to do that. So that would be my advice for that. And just not to take over the entire call, I believe there was one that basically said how you manage your emotions effectively in a high stakes work environment. Again, I'll leave that to Emma.
Thanks, Jide.
Ladies first and last. So.
Thank you. Look, I think that again is a really tricky one, because especially when you are passionate about something, whether that's the job that you're doing or the particular case that you're dealing with, the situation, I think it's, again, that you kind of come down to that empathy thing a little bit, in that I think we have a tendency when we care about something to get very emotional. Now, how is that end user, how is the other person going to feel when we overreact, get emotional, et cetera, and we're going to try and be understanding in terms of when somebody gets like that. But where is it coming from? Are they frustrated by the situation? Are they frustrated by their lack of action or their action to it? I think it's about going into it and just kind of bringing yourself back a step, taking a moment before you open the mouth, before you send the email. And I will openly admit, I have had conversations and meetings where I've got rather frustrated and I've gone to type an email and then I've stepped away for 10 minutes and come back and gone, I should not send that email. Because if I received that email, it wouldn't be particularly nice. So, and I know I've talked about empathy a lot, but it is sometimes about putting yourself in that other person's shoes, because we do get so caught up in our emotions when we care about something that actually sometimes the best thing you can do is step away for 10 minutes. Step away for 10 minutes and then come back and readdress whatever it is you're dealing with. But that's just me personally.
No, I agree. I've done that before too. It's good advice. So yeah, just finally, thank you to all of the panel for sharing all of your amazing words of wisdom. And thank you to BYP for helping us to organise this. I hope it's been valuable for all of you listeners as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for hosting us.
Yeah, great host.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a lovely evening.